The rise of Putin in the Second Chechen War. Okay. My boy Griffin, he wants to talk to us about the rise of Vladimir Putin. Let's go.
Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian.
I like this guy. I'm kind of hot for him. I don't know. He kind of makes me horny. Is that sexist? If that was a girl, that would be sexist. But man on man, that's not sexist, right? I don't know.
None seem as incapable of ignoring the international spotlight as Vladimir Putin.
He can pull off jeans shirt. Look at that shirt. Dude, the 80s are calling. They want their shirt back. But he makes it look good. He makes it look good. Look at his fingers. I think this man works with his hands, dude. This guy knows how to build IKEA furniture. Anyway.
From relatively humble beginnings, as the third and only surviving son of a naval conscript and factory worker, Putin would climb the...
Oh, he has two dead brothers? Already, man. Never heard of that. Wow. Two dead brothers already.
The ever-shifting power structure of first the Soviet Union and then the Russian Federation.
I mean... One thing you gotta say about Putin is how much this man must have seen in his life. Fucking agent in East Germany, right? President of Russia. That guy must have done and seen some fucking crazy things, man. Which made him crazy in the end, right? And made him
until finally claiming his place as leader of one of the largest, most powerful nations. But Putin's rise to prominence amongst his peers is inextricably linked with the Chechen Wars, a series of conflicts fought over control of the country of Chechnya in the northern Caucasus.
Did it 3 times, man.
In this video,
I know that Elder Kings 2 is out, you fuck. Shut up.
We'll be examining the
30 minutes, 5 seconds it took me to fucking shit on someone. And it's always an unsub. Listen to the video.
Second Chechen War and exploring how Putin's careful political schemes exploited the unstable region to both expand the scope of Russian influence and enable his own ascension to the highest office in the nation.
Imagine climbing this much to the top of the Russian Federation only to be beaten by Ukrainian farmers. It's a thin line you're walking nowadays when you're a leader, you know? It's a thin line.
In a region as ethnically diverse as the Caucasus, being able to understand and communicate with the local population is vitally important, especially during long military campaigns. In such situations, misunderstandings and miscommunication due to language differences can often be an obstacle to achieving strategic objectives. It's for this reason that I'm excited to thank the sponsor of today's video, Speakly.
Speakly? What could Speakly be? What the fuck is Speakly? Speakly is learning languages,
Speakly
right?
is a language learning app designed...
Never heard of that, though. Isn't Duolingo or whatever the fuck the ultimate leader on the market? Duolingo.
Designed to help you learn languages up to 5 times faster than conventional methods. Uniquely, the app lets you choose...
I'm actually thinking of getting an app like this soon to learn Italian, man.
Your own...
But let's be honest, I'm gonna do it for 1 week and then I just throw it in the trash.
Study methods, focusing on vocabulary...
Soy un hombre. I am a man. Oh, man, you're gonna get canceled, bro.
Multiple choice.
Ciao. Wait, isn't this Italian? Ciao, io sono Barbara. Benvenuti nel nostro esercizio di ascolto. Hello, my name is Barbara. Welcome to our house, I think? In questo esercizio imperial ad essere un genitore migliore. I think she wants to remake an empire. Ascolta attentamente e prova a vedere quanto ci capisci. Do you understand this, you bitch? Yeah, that's Italian. Bravissimo.
Options or a combination.
Oh, welcome to our listen exercise. Okay. Fuck, I want to learn Italian, dude.
Of the 3. Available on both web and mobile devices, Speakly is accessible anywhere at any time, giving you a streamlined learning process that can be customized according to your needs. You can try Speakly today with a free 7-day trial.
There's compilations of weird words and sentences that Duolingo wants you to say in other languages. The fuck?
And get a 60% discount on an annual subscription. Support our channel, learn a new language, and sign up for Speakly using our link in the description below. During the chaotic first years of the post-Soviet era, the small and fairly insignificant breakaway Chechen Republic of Ichkeria was mostly left to its own devices, while President Boris Yeltsin struggled to create a viable Russian government and stabilize the economy. But Yeltsin always kept the region in the back of his mind, fearing that other Russian republics would use Chechnya
I chill with baby or I stream, there's nothing else.
As example to make their own bids for freedom. Chechnya was utterly plagued with crime and corruption to such an extent ethnic Russians were leaving in droves. And by November of 1994, Yeltsin authorized the use of disguised military personnel to overthrow the government, then openly resorted to force after this attempt failed. But Yeltsin's hope of a brief, easy intervention were dashed when the poorly...
It's like the history of Russia at this point, huh? But what did the West do at that time? Why would they just let them do that?
coordinated Russian advance on the capital city of Grozny was stalled for days by a motley collection of Chechen troops, volunteers, and foreign mercenaries. Even when Grozny fell, the Chechens simply began a protracted guerrilla war in the countryside. The Chechen president at the time was Zakhar Dadayev, a veteran of the Soviet-Afghan War who knew exactly how to counter the Federation offensives, while much of the field actions were organized by a military officer and hardline Muslim extremist named Shamil Basayev, who had close ties with the Mujahideen.
A lot of Muslims in that region, man. I remember, man. I never knew much about the Chechen War, but I remember though, when I was a kid, man. There would be I will never forget, and there was this video around on the schoolyard in school of Chechens beheading Russian soldiers, man. I remember that. It was a gore video, like they literally beheaded someone, and they would send that to everyone in class. And I was this young kid, and I had this girl next to me, Lisa, a different Lisa, haha, and she would show me the video. I'm like, whoa, what the fuck? Did you just show me how a guy gets beheaded? Can I see it again, please?
Though guilty of blatant acts of terrorism against the Russian people, Basayev would go on to serve as the chairman of Chechnya after Yeltsin was forced to sign the Ksav-Yurt Accords in 1996. These accords brought hostilities to an end, but left the status of Chechnya in a gray area that both sides knew would only cause future conflict. 1996 was also an election year in Russia, and thanks to the bungled war effort, the increasingly unpopular and unhealthy Boris Yeltsin urgently needed support against his political rivals. Enter Vladimir Putin, an unassuming former KGB agent brought on to assist Yeltsin's campaign. For the next 7 months, the powerful Moscow oligarchs savaged each other in the political arena, while Putin discreetly toiled in the background. In 1997, a successfully re-elected Yeltsin promoted him to chief of the main control directorate of the Presidential Property Management Department and deputy chief of the presidential staff. This gave Putin wide-reaching authority to investigate government corruption, which he prosecuted with a selective diligence that always conveniently benefited the Yeltsin administration. The connections he forged via these investigations would earn him many friends and equally as many enemies, and were instrumental in his appointment to the directorship of the Federal Security Service in 1998 and the office of Prime Minister in August 1999 after Yeltsin fired his previous Prime Minister and entire political cabinet for the 4th time. But while Putin was busy amassing power with Yeltsin's presidency...
It just has this assuming from the outside stable cloak around it, even though Russia is such an chaotic country, man. It's like the warp in Warhammer.
Shamil Basayev was plotting to destroy it.
Thank you, Artesia,
on August 7th, Basayev and fellow Muslim extremist Ibn el-Khattab led a 1,400-strong Islamist insurgency into the neighboring Republic of Dagestan. Intending to establish a new Chechen Dagestan Islamic Republic, having already begun emerging from Yeltsin's shadow, Putin now asked the president for absolute power to coordinate the Russian response to Dagestan. Yeltsin and the rest of the Russian Duma agreed, and Putin threw himself into proving that the Russian Federation still had its teeth. Within a month, the dream of an Islamic Republic had been trampled into the dust by the boots of nearly 20,000 Russian soldiers, backed up by artillery, airstrikes, and even a small number of shiny new T-90 main battle tanks. But just as war seemed to be wrapping up early in September, a series of explosions rocked apartment complexes across Moscow and Volgodonsk. Putin had intelligence assets in Chechnya, and these swiftly blamed Ibn el-Khattab for the deaths of at least 293 innocent Russian civilians. The explosions also outraged the nation, and this spirit of righteous indignation
makes you think, right? Could be false flag. You know, not if you look at Putin nowadays, Nobody fucking knows, man. Could be straight up false flag.
Nation was
We will never know,
expertly
but
channeled
there's a
by
chance.
Putin's rhetoric at the time, and his popularity skyrocketed when he
what a real villain, dude. What a real life villain. Like what a literal Zoran manipulating and killing man.
began aggressively calling for retribution against Chechnya. The issue was that the president of Chechnya, Aslan Maskadov, was absolutely desperate to avoid another.
Imagine that. Imagine, we don't know the answer. I don't want to know what you think, but imagine he actually did that. He killed 290 civilians for his own gain, and now Russia treats him like a great. Wow, man, what a villain story. Thank you, Kloman. What a perfect villain.
War. In August, Russian planes had entered Chechen airspace and bombed retreating Mujahid.
One big, you guys, I know a lot of you guys look up to me. Never join an Islamic revolution. If you ever hear like, hey, we're making a new ISIS, we're like trying to make this Islamic Republic, don't go there, okay? Don't fucking do it, okay?
But
you're gonna have like 2 good weeks. They're gonna give you a 14-year-old wife, and then you're gonna blow the fuck up.
Maskadov refused to retaliate.
Don't do it, bro.
While Putin prepared to attack, Maskadov was practically screaming his desire to negotiate from the nearest rooftop, going so far as to repeatedly try to telephone Yeltsin personally, only to be ignored at every turn. Of course, absolutely none of this mattered to Putin, and on the 30th of September, 90,000 Russian soldiers thundered across the border into northern
That's kind of the same amount that went for Ukraine, right?
Chechnya, now led by experienced veterans of the First Chechen War. The Russians reacted to urban guerrilla warfare by simply flattening every piece of...
And it's so sad to me that most of the public, even me, have forgotten about this. Right? We're discussing Putin so much in 2022, and everybody forgot about this.
Available cover with gratuitous amounts of artillery fire and airstrikes. The local Chechen village elders were politely told to expel any rebels and submit to occupation, or have their settlements declared terrorist bases and subsequently bombed to rubble. By early November, the Russians were advancing across the Terek River, straight towards Grozny, to surround it and blast the defenders into submission with overwhelming firepower. On the 12th...
Yeah, this kind of video shows once again that Kadyrov is the biggest bitch of all times. I said this for months now. I think Kadyrov is the biggest bitch on this planet at the moment. They took your country, Kadyrov. They took your Islamic country, and now you work for them. You dog. You literal fucking cuckold, man. You unbelievably biggest loser of the 21st century, dude.
Gudermas, the second largest city in Chechnya, fell to the Russian advance. And just a few weeks later, the first troops reached the outskirts of Grozny and began the siege. Over the next 2 months, Grozny was subjected to constant bombardment, while Russian troops secured strategic positions in the suburbs and skirmished with their Chechen counterparts, who often tried disguising themselves in Russian uniforms during nighttime raids.
Oh, that's the...
in early December, the nearby city of Argon fell after significant resistance that left several hundred Russians dead or wounded. With its capture, Grozny was surrounded, and the real attack could begin. The Russian plan of attack involved dividing Grozny into 15 sectors, reconnoitered one by one to identify enemy strongholds. These would then be subjected to long-range bombardment before sappers created safe corridors for infantry to secure the sector. The bulk of the street fighting would...
Sounds so weird how the Russian army used to be organized.
Done by loyalist Chechen militia under the command of a former mayor of Grozny, Bislan Gantamirov. Backing up the militia were 2 MVD brigades and several units of the feared Russian Special Forces operatives, the Spetsnaz. The operation was intended to reduce the mobility of Chechen defenders and create a spiderweb of Russian-controlled areas throughout the city. After this web had been woven around Grozny, storm detachments of 30 to 50 men would break up pockets of serious resistance, while the militia would mop up these stragglers. Each detachment also had access to sniper rifles.
Number one, to me, the biggest quote of the Ukraine war is when the soldier says, "We are so lucky that they're so fucking stupid, man." Look what happens when Russians are not stupid. They're fucking crap, man.
Rocket-propelled grenades and the terrifying Shmel RPO-A flamethrower. On the 24th of December, the first Russian soldiers advanced into Grozny, escorted closely by tanks and backed up by BMP infantry fighting vehicles that also acted as field ambulances. With so much firepower at their disposal, the Russians avoided close combat whenever possible, instead marking clusters of resistance for elimination by mortar and artillery barrages. The first reports of the battle to reach the Russian media were glowingly positive, describing the occupation of huge swaths of Grozny and virtually no direct confrontations with the enemy. But in reality, the fighting was vicious, hectic, and extremely intense. Guerrilla fighters were constantly sneaking past the siege lines to reinforce their comrades in the city.
You cannot compare rebels to NATO-supplied Ukrainians. My point is that this video shows something. They had a very tactical doctrine approach to taking the city. I don't see that anywhere in Ukraine. These tactical approaches, man. The only tactical approach they have is how they can bring the fucking washing machine home. Thank you for 3 fucking years, Portal, man. Mwah, kiss on the nose. I have herpes on my nose. I think it's possible. Normally you have herpes on your lips. I have a herpes on my nose. What the fuck? It's weird. I don't know. Anyway.
And were far more numerous and determined than expected. The Chechen militia complained they were left unsupported during engagements, and the Russian troops often failed to adequately secure sectors before moving on, resulting in territory captured one day being lost the next day.
I've sometimes, look, you guys are all obviously military experts. Don't you use shock troopers nowadays anymore? Is shock troopers still a thing nowadays?
The worst fighting occurred in January of the new year, as both sides grappled for control over Minutka Square.
Shock trooper is infantry that's supposed to make it close and dirty. You are sent in to get very close to the enemy and make it very dirty, man. Like, you make it very close combat, man. Fucking knives, and you look them in the face and shit. And it's very, if you're very trained at that, you can bring a lot of terror into the enemy and really just disorganize them quickly.
Surrounded by 5 to 9 story buildings that made ideal positioning for snipers. Long-range duels were interspersed by frantic close-quarters combat as Chechens used tunnels and hidden crawl spaces to infiltrate Russian lines. The tallest building in Grozny was also located near the square, and changed hands multiple times throughout the month.
It's like a Call of Duty map, dude.
But while Chechen control over Grozny was slowly eroding, Putin's control over the Russian government had become absolute. After nearly a decade of struggling with severe alcoholism and heart disease, Yeltsin had decided not to stand for re-election.
That sounds just like Russia. Thank you, Matt, brother. Thank you so much, brother. Appreciate it. 7 ads? Well, fucking subscribe, you idiot. Looks like a war zone.
The year 2000. But Yeltsin was in a conundrum, as the office of president was the only thing protecting him from the vast horde of extremely rich enemies he had acquired. In late 1999, Yeltsin summoned Putin to his private residence and made a deal. In exchange for resigning and letting Putin become the acting president for the rest of his term, Putin would grant Yeltsin immunity from prosecution when he left the office. Yeltsin resigned on New Year's Eve, and that very evening, Putin traveled to Dagestan and made speeches affirming his commitment to the war effort, including the quote, "This is not..."
Thank you for Skater. Back when he would go close to the war zones and would make speeches, man. He ain't doing this right now, boy. Thank you for the
not just about
Are you guys excited for One Piece tonight?
Restoring Russia's honor and dignity. It's about putting an end to the breakup of the Russian Federation.
Gonna ring the bell in a second.
Their resolve strengthened by the knowledge that they were now led by a relatively young, healthy, and highly energetic leader instead of the aging, sickly, and horribly unpopular Yeltsin. Russian troops continued to push into the Chechen capital. By January, Grozny had earned the highly prestigious title of the most battle-damaged city since the Second World War, with vast sections having been utterly obliterated.
I know about Grozny that in German rapping, right? If a rapper is born in Grozny, that's like a big thing in the German rap scene. Hey, I'm Chechen. I'm from Chechnya. I'm from war. And then everybody buys their records because they're from... Like in Germany, in German rap, it's really important that you're Chechenian. Czech, whatever the fuck, Czechoslovakian, whatever. And the kids love that shit, man. He's from a war zone. I gotta buy his records, man.
By weeks of Russian shelling. Early January saw the fiercest fighting yet, as the Chechen rebels mounted a last-ditch counteroffensive that saw guerrillas popping up behind enemy lines in Argun, Gundermes, and Shali. By this point, Russian paranoia was at an all-time high, and there are many allegations of Federation soldiers indiscriminately murdering civilians to root out disguised...
I'm fucking telling you, dude. 30 years of human rights violations, of Geneva of breaking the Geneva Code, man, and no one does anything, man. We even the next 30 years we will buy their gas, we will make connections with them, and I sit here telling you today, man, if you look at this stuff, who is to blame? Our corrupt politicians, Western politicians that look for easy money, for easy connections, for easy side money, man. They made us very connected to Putin's Russia for 30 years, and now we have to all eat the shit that they did for us, man. It's fucking ridiculous, man. It's quite fucking ridiculous. The West walks always around about human rights and we have all these laws, but if something happens, we all fucking, I only do something if the enemy is weak enough.
Insurgents, or simply
disgrace.
out of sheer frustration at the continued Chechen defiance. Just as it became clear Grozny was a lost cause, Shamil Basayev.
Just last week when there was the reports, they finished the exhumation of mass graves they found in Izum, right? And they had marks that they had marks, man. It just happened last week that we have proof that this happens nowadays. And dude, we have people in front of the Berlin Gate with Russian flags, man. What a dude, I always say, man, if God exists, man, he must just sit there going like this, man. It's you can't even think about this stuff. Thank you, Tomato.
Basayev arrived to personally coordinate a breakout attempt through the vast Russian minefield encircling the city. On the 29th, Basayev and his officers led the way through the mines, marking the way for their beleaguered subordinates. Though many were wounded, the majority were able to escape, leaving the capital once again in the hands of the invaders. But this retreat infuriated Muskadev, who had hoped to negotiate with the Russian officials while Grozny still held. To make matters worse, many survivors of the battle crossed the border into neutral Georgia, which the Russians cheerfully used as an excuse to conduct airstrikes into Georgian territory. This sent a clear message to other nations in the Caucasus, demonstrating that Putin would not tolerate even passive cooperation with Chechnya, dashing Muskadev's hopes of forming a coalition in the region. Even the Americans cynically exploited the situation for their own benefit, making a great show of offering aid to the innocent Georgians, while paying lip service at best to Chechnya. Alone, isolated, and forced to rely on wanted terrorists for the defense of his country, Muskadev was in an untenable situation. His every attempt at peace talks were sabotaged by Muslim radicals, and the legitimacy of his government had been forever tainted by his association with men like Basayev and El-Khattab. Having seized the capital, the Russian army now spread out into the countryside to conduct mopping-up operations. Most remaining pockets of opposition were holed up in the mountainous regions in the south of the country, such as Chatoy and Vidino. But even the largest of these consisted of a few hundred men at most, and their ability to resist amounted to acts of sabotage and terrorism designed to make life as annoying for the occupiers as possible.
Mental. We're living in a fucking
While the
zoo,
Chechen insurgency clung to the faint hope of victory, Vladimir Putin was being sworn in as president of the Russian Federation. His policies in Chechnya had been carefully spun by the media as the actions of a man determined to weld the various fragmentary parts of the Union back into a united, cohesive whole. Thanks to this, Putin secured an easy 53% of the popular vote. Just 2 months after his victory, Putin placed Chechnya under direct rule, with a hand-picked pro-Russian government taking office in the blasted ruins of Grozny. But the real government of Chechnya persisted, with Muskadev continuing to try and represent his nation to the best of his abilities while in exile. However, his credibility would be constantly sabotaged, particularly by the events of 9/11. Almost as soon as the attack occurred, Putin called President Bush, ostensibly to express condolences, but also taking the time to imply a link between the Chechen resistance and Al-Qaeda. By planting such seeds of doubt, Putin was able to keep international pressure off of Russia while leaving the Chechen government isolated. Muskadev's last gasp came in 2002, when El-Khattab was assassinated by a poisoned letter. By far the most extreme member of the Chechen resistance, El-Khattab's death indirectly gave Muskadev the political capital needed to bring the eternally bickering Chechen guerrillas
together. But if you ever get a letter from Russia, you fucking don't touch that shit, man. Even if some Russian grandma sends you a boxer short, you don't touch that.
Together one last time. Naturally, Basayev chose this exact moment to claim responsibility for a hostage-taking at the Nordost Theater in Moscow. Since he was still commander-in-chief of Chechnya's armed forces, this extremely public link to a terrorist attack that resulted in hundreds of innocent deaths destroyed Muscatev's dream.
The biggest losers in all these power struggles are always civilians, huh? They always get fucked,
of
man.
Negotiation once and for all. Basayev would leave the Chechen government shortly thereafter, but not before him and Muscatev publicly denounced each other as Russian double agents. 2002 was also the year the Russian army handed over combat duties against the insurgents to locally appointed militia groups made up of Chechen loyalists. In October of 2003, the Chechen government installed by Russian-elected Akhmad Kadyrov as president. Kadyrov oversaw a referendum on the constitution, which included a motion to reintegrate with the Russian Federation. Debate over the wording of the constitution was forbidden, and over 80,000 Russian soldiers were also allowed to vote, rendering the proceedings farcical. To further emphasize just how little power the puppet government had, Kadyrov was killed in an explosion at Grozny Stadium in 2004,
like
and the Kremlin reacted by putting his son, Ramzan, through an emergency political education as his father's eventual successor.
Emergency education, man. You can see that nowadays, that's for sure.
2004 also saw Aslan Muscatev's death, as he was tracked down by Russian special forces and killed by a grenade blast. Shamil Basayev would last until 2006, when he too met an explosive end by accidentally triggering a mine.
I mean, it must be... I want to give one little credit to the dog of the world, Kadyrov. He probably knows if he shows any anti-Russian sentiment, he's fucking gone, man.
While attempting to disarm it. For various reasons, it is impossible to definitively determine when the Second Chechen War came to an end. Remnants of the insurgency continue operating to this day, and fragments of the Ichkeria government still cling to legitimacy in secluded corners of the Caucasus. However, most place the end of the conventional conflict as occurring shortly after the fall of Grozny, while anti-terrorist operations continued into the late 2000s. It is estimated that to this date, around 7,000 Russians have been killed in combat with insurgents in exchange for around 16,000 Chechen casualties. The civilian toll is up to 10 times higher, with both sides accused of extensive war crimes against innocents, and acts of terrorism by Chechen extremists having killed at least 600 Russians outside the borders of Chechnya itself.